Can you start with kind of sharing what is the work that you focus on? And I know it's evolved a bit. You've been doing it several years now, but where do you really feel the passion for what you're doing or where you feel the biggest transformation?
Helping people master the mental element, the mental game, the whatever we call it. I mean, my name on Instagram is the mind friend. So it's also like there's this element of being friends with your mind to enable you to do all these things and to show up the way that you want to powerfully to pursue the actual dream that's going to fulfill you or dreams, should I say, and to really share your gifts with the world.
I love the last sentence, share your gifts with the world, because there's always that saying, right, where the magic happens where you feel the most. I can't remember if it's love, alignment, something like that, and what the world needs. So I really like that. That's beautiful.
That is actually such a wonderful thing that you picked that up too, because it's actually a really if we're gonna jump into kind of mindset shifts already, it's a very important shift, right? It's like, how can I take this outside of myself? Like, often when I'm so concerned only with myself, I'm actually not thinking of how does this serve anyone? How does this contribute to anything? And that can not only be a great motivator, but it can also set you free from, oh my gosh, everyone's looking at every single thing I'm doing and like everyone's judging me, right? Because that's not really what's going on. And so I think that pivot to what are you sharing? What are you giving to the world is super, super valuable.
It's almost like that's where you feel so much growth too, isn't it? Because personally, of course, but also externally, if your focus is more on that, then you don't have the same hangups about do I put this out or not? Do I go after this or not? Do I obsess about this failure or not? Because the whole outcome of what you're creating is not based on your ego anymore. What was kind of the beginning of this work that you're doing? What was the moment where you figured out what is that intersection of what my gift is, what I know I can help with?
It all really started from me just with my background in psychology and with like everything that I studied saying like more people need to know this, like more people need to have access to this information. That really began from a I just want to share these like tips and tricks with people. And so I think it was more like puzzle pieces stacking together eventually that led me where I am now. And this is where I am now. And I think I also always make a point of like, that doesn't mean I'm going to be here in 5 years. In 5 years, I might have a different focus because, like, why would I want to be stagnant in this, right? Why wouldn't I think that it's dynamic? Just pursuing one thing for a while doesn't mean that you need to pursue that forever, but you will definitely learn something from it.
Oh, this speaks to my heart. I have been that person. You're the one that just feels like, "Oh, I don't wanna be the X person forever. I don't wanna be pigeonholed in this area." And it stifles you so much because you can't focus because you don't wanna be narrowed down, and you can't grow because you're not narrowing down, for the time being, right? So I really, really sympathize with that, the idea of permission to evolve.
100%. Everything that you said is so spot on. It's that you can keep yourself so stuck in believing that you need to be all the things and never committing to one thing, even if just for a time. And really, that's just a form also of avoidance and self sabotage. Because if I'm never deciding, committing to anything, then I never have to do the thing. You know, I can just keep thinking about half doing all the other things at the same time.
It's so true. Ah, a lot of us are feeling seen right now, I'm sure.
I call you out with love.
Is there what was the reason behind because you have this psychology background, which this is why I think it's so interesting what you do because there's many people who are supporting in business and marketing, but one of the major pieces we struggle with as business owners, as entrepreneurs and creators is the mindset and the psychology. So what was the moment or the moments where you thought, I'm going to focus on this group of people specifically? Because with psychology, you really could have gone in any direction you wanted to.
I wanna say that there was a bit of an intuition and guidance always to wanting to go sort of in the scene of what we call positive psychology, which just means it's very simplified, but it's the easiest way I find to explain to people. If we look at traditional psychology, we're taking people from -5 to 0, back to functioning, fine, etcetera. And then there's all these people that are like, "It's fine." We call this languishing. But how do we get it to it's great? And really, I think that there's just always been such an appreciation for, like, this one life that we get, and I always wanted to work in sort of that field of, like, how can we actually live this life that we get? And then as I became an entrepreneur myself and as I developed in that direction, I think it just naturally also attracts more and you empathize even more with those issues, I don't exclude myself from this because mindset work is lifelong work, right? This is also the saying of new level, new devil, etc. I really think of these practices much more like hygiene practices. Like you floss or brush your teeth, hopefully both, but maybe just one of them your entire life, right? To prevent the decay, etc. And people sometimes look at mindset work like, oh, I just had this moment of motivation and then I'm gonna just continuing on, and I stop paying attention, and I don't have any habits and practices that help me.
Your content resonates with so many people because if you write a piece that really goes to someone's heart, to their soul, to what they're thinking, it's because you have felt it.
Yeah, I agree. There's also that saying you can only take people as far as you've gone yourself or as deep as you've gone yourself, right?
When you're working with entrepreneurs and business owners and people in those fields, I imagine it's a huge mix of people with different industries, stages of growth, etc. But are there any patterns you see in terms of people who are in that languishing phase that you said that want to go more towards this thriving or to finding balance? Are there any common patterns that you can see or blocks that are there, or even just maybe they're not common throughout, but the ones that you can mostly see.
I mean, yes. How much time do you have? And I guess this would even expand to, other people. It just comes out more in entrepreneurs because they're already doing the thing that isn't necessarily aligned with quote unquote the traditional path. And so they've already stepped out into this unknown in some way, which will pose new questions that maybe someone who just sort of follows the traditional path, let's call it, doesn't ever stop to ask themselves that, which is also completely fine, right? But entrepreneurship really puts people in this position of like, what am I doing in all senses of the word? And that means, questions of like, how much should I love what I'm doing? Like, sort of, I don't want to, that saying of like, if you love what you do, you never work a second in your life or something like that. Like, it's not really true. Yes, we want to find fulfillment, we want to find alignment, we want to find joy, and we want to find excitement. And also, you're human, and not every second is gonna be like, oh my gosh, I can't think of anything better to do right now. But I've kind of opened myself to creating new rules or uncreating the rules in general leaves you with this emptiness or this vastness of like, well, what is it that I really want to do? That's a huge, huge question. And we have that in all kinds of variations of like, I just kind of did the thing I thought I should be doing. And they're already in business, but pivoting. I think we spoke about this briefly earlier. Or it's people who are like, I know that I don't want to be in a 9 to 5. I know I want my own thing. Like I have this calling, but what is it? What do I do? Huge one. And as far as blockers go, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of visibility. So visibility obviously calls out a huge, huge chain of I'm going to be judged, I'm going to do it wrong, I'm going to do all those things, right? But usually we need to become visible in some way if we're going to run a business. And often I work with people who are the business. So, right, really one person businesses, solopreneurs, content creators, etc. They are the business. It's a personal brand business, expertise based. Um, Imposter syndrome, really, yeah, the list could go on.
One for each episode. Basically, this is another podcast.
Let's do a whole series on one let's focus on one mindset block each for sure. Perfectionism, procrastination, or like this whole like planning paralysis, and you're trying to come up with this perfect plan and really it's just like I say this now, but really it's just a way of trying to keep yourself safe because you think that once you have the perfect plan that you can perfectly control, nothing bad can happen. And so you keep yourself in this like I'm going to absorb more information, I'm going to read more books, I'm going to do all the things, but I'm never actually doing anything.
We call them collectors. I have been a big collector.
I love that.
If I have this fear of failure, if I have this perfectionism, if I have this fear of judgment, then it's safer for me to keep learning. And it's also socially condoned and even encouraged. So I can keep doing it. And I never thought about it this way till you said it. Is it's almost like the vastness that's open to you as an entrepreneur, the new rules that you're talking about because many of us come from a traditional job workplace or we've been brought up in that world, the ascension model or the way you promote, right, is you get specialized, you focus on one thing that is your career for years. You play by those rules. That's how you win. And it's almost like we've internalized those rules for a completely different playing field where they don't work.
Yeah. And it's not only that ascension rule. I love that. Like, let's call it the ascension rule. It's also the rule of I need to work these hours. This is how productivity needs to look. This is right. I think you mentioned balance earlier. It's like it's a very different productivity from a productivity that is much more brain based or social interaction, even so someone like who might be a coach or provide a service and work with people. And so this idea that, work needs to look like this from I need to start at whatever 8 o'clock in the morning and I need to go until then and I can only do a half an hour break in between and all these things. People keep themselves stuck in these rules, these norms that don't actually have to or even get to apply the same to this new world of entrepreneurship. And there's so much beauty in that, right? But with freedom comes responsibility. I have the freedom to create my workday. I have the freedom to create my lifestyle. But then I also need to take that responsibility and really ask myself what I want that to look like and be disciplined enough to do it before I know it. Otherwise, I will fall back into, oh, I'm just hustling, 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 and going back on the ascension model kind of thing. And wasn't that what I was trying to get away from?
Well, the frustrating thing too of what you're saying is if you're hustling, 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 unlike that model where it can get you ahead in a traditional workplace, it doesn't always translate here. So the frustration is so deep because you have these values in this paradigm, but it doesn't work. And you're trying so hard and you don't understand why is this not working, right? Like this is I'm doing everything I'm supposed to. I think I've probably said that many times and anyone listening
Mhm.
to, doing everything I can, everything I'm supposed to. Why is it not translating into success? Why are people not coming? What's wrong here? And it requires a different opening, but there's also something you said about responsibility. And I feel like sometimes we overwhelm ourselves with it. We go the other side of what you and I were talking about earlier. And I'd love to ask you about this, the danger of thinking of yourself as the business and the business as you.
Factually, this is true. Like, right, you are the only one creating the business. Maybe you have a few assistants, maybe you have a few team members, etc. But you are the business in this sense, right? However, that doesn't mean you need to attach your identity and self-worth to that, which often, we say identity, but often it's much more self-worth. So I don't get the client, I think I'm bad. I don't get the X, Y, and Z, or my social media doesn't do what I want it to do, and I think I'm clearly wrong. My message is not right, et cetera, et cetera. So I internalize any and all of that. Something you mentioned earlier as well is like this question of like, why isn't this working? Why isn't anyone coming? Right. To just take a beeline there for a second, because it, the more I focus on that, the more I create of that. Right. This is like the literally keeping your eyes on the road kind of metaphor that I love to use. It's like in driving school, they teach us keep your eyes on the road because if you look at the tree, that's where you're going to go. And so when we're trying to figure out these things of like, why am I stuck? Why is it this, that? Like, we often are doing exactly that. We're looking at the tree and not asking ourselves and then taking responsibility. This is where the responsibility comes back in of like, okay, this didn't work the way I wanted it to. And now what do I want it to look like? Where do I want to go? Listening to your, inner narration of what it means when something happens in your business, like the meaning you create from that. And if you have that too fused with your identity, you will feel miserable. And that is literally the same. It's an ongoing practice of, first of all, recognizing what else you are, all the other things you are. But it might also mean, recognizing all your successes. Like I say to people all the time, you have a far too broad definition of failure and a far too narrow definition of success. Without generalizing, but often women have this tendency to say, yeah, I did that, but anyone could do that. It wasn't perfect. It's like literally you have a success and then you go, but it's not perfect. And the success is only valid if it's perfect and ideal and everything did exactly what you wanted it to do. Then it's success. But the failure can be the 1% off. And so to just recognize for yourself, like, wow. And of course, then if you see failure everywhere because you have defined it so broadly, but you're making it mean something about your self-worth, about your identity, I mean, you're setting yourself up to be miserable, really. Very much looking at the inner narration, at the inner stories that you're telling yourself, the meaning that you're making. But then also sometimes the practice is just in literally broadening your success scope and noticing the success because your brain will always naturally go, towards the negative, towards what's missing, towards what's lacking.
The visual of having this extremely wide band of failure for your definition and this tiny sliver for success. And if you just go objectively looking at that as if a diagram, where are you going to fall most of the times? It's impossible that you would get that tiny sliver. Almost never would you recognize that. Probably the biggest issue in terms of motivation that I have experienced, that I've seen with other entrepreneurs, is it's so hard when you only see that failure and you don't see that sliver of success. And how do you keep going when there is no proof that it's even working?
Again, what is the proof, the success? We often measure this by rules as well that we've been taught, right? So the success, the proof is once I've earned X amount of money or once I have X amount of clients or whatever. And to also there ask, well, what is an internal measure of success? Because those usually come much quicker. So even if I'm super in flow when I work on this, I get super excited when I talk about this. I like just feel so aligned when I work with this one person, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all proofs that you are moving in a direction that's going to be fulfilling for you. And of course, yeah, like people are gonna say, "Yeah, but do you need to make money?" Yeah. Whenever I think about fulfillment, it's like, "Have you seen housing prices?" And I'm like, "Yes." I'm not saying don't make money. I'm not saying don't set goals to make money. I'm just saying that don't let that be the only definition of your success. Don't let your definition be so external that you have no chance to feel anything of success, of momentum until you reach whatever that number is or, however you've defined that externally.
Yeah, because you could argue that it's gonna be that much harder to reach that monetary goal if you're so blindsided by your failures and you're not noticing those other definitions of success, like impact, like personal growth, like freedom and flexibility you have to be there for your family or your friends, and all that stuff that we achieve as entrepreneurs that is not as I wonder, I'm curious to get your opinion on this because I wonder if part of the problem is that what the wider world recognizes, in regular workplace as success is how much you're earning. And I do wonder if perhaps it's the case of feeling judged and not like you're making it until you can show that world, here's proof that I've done it.
I think that is a huge role I get people saying often, they're embarrassed to talk about their business because it's not making X amount yet, because that's kind of the question that people ask. And this though comes back to this theme that we were talking about earlier, like you kind of stepping into a new world with new rules. There's a process that I take all my clients through that like many people find frustrating because they're not doing anything at the start, but there has to be a process of liberating and even just clarifying all these rules that you have placed on yourself or that have been placed on you, but you've repeated them to yourself and getting clear on which ones you want to keep and which ones you don't. Because just because they've been repeated to you your entire life doesn't mean you have to keep them. But if you're not even aware that you've been doing that and you're just kind of letting your unconscious still drive that way, you won't do anything about it. But I think through a process like that, where you become so clear on like, well, here are the reasons I have my business. I have my business so I can start work at 10 a.m., so I can have more time with my kids, so I can take Wednesdays off, so I can do X, Y, and Z, right? Like this comes back to this, like, what is creating your success definition, but getting so clear on that and knowing how it relates back to your values, to your vision for life, et cetera, et cetera. And it's almost like when I have that foundation to stand on, I have a lot more to kind of protect again when a comment like that comes in. And yeah, the comments might come in and they might cause a moment of self-doubt, and that's okay. Right. But if I have this foundation to return to and I'm very clear on it and I'm like literally putting it down somewhere, it's not just somewhere floating around me internally, but it's like clarified, then I can be like, "Oh, yeah, this person obviously doesn't value these things that I have as much as I do. I see that they never spend time with their kids because they're in this high level, high earning job, et cetera. And I've decided for myself that that's actually the most important thing in my life." And to return to right, to return to that, mistake that many people do is to not take that pause, that time. It's like everything else that you do after that, after you've built that foundation and you've kind of like let go of the stuff, decided what you wanna keep, decided what you want it to look like, that foundation is everything in terms of feeling stable and feeling that quiet level of confidence and not being so derailed by whether it's a comment someone's making about how much money you're making, by whether it's a client saying no to you, whatever it is, not feeling so derailed by that because it's solid. Sometimes people try to put on the painting or the color of the house first. What does it look like? How much am I earning? What can I say to people? But the foundation is crumbly. And so that's not very sustainable.
Nobody really sees the foundation, right? Nobody nobody cares, and I think that's where you get derailed, as you said, is what people appreciate is the visual exterior at first glance if they're going around shopping for homes, right? And the foundation is the most important if you're gonna be living in it, which we are, we're doing this day to day. But I love the idea of coming back to this foundation you created when someone says no, when someone asks a triggering question, always coming back to it because it is easy if you don't have that foundation to just fall down. And it's what you said too of most people, if we're really honest, when you choose to be an entrepreneur, it's not because you see so much earning potential in it. That's not your main motivator for starting.
Yes. Most people say freedom is why they're starting, or purpose is why they're starting, impact potentially, right? Again, they choose these more internal things actually. But again, then the way the story goes is I'm just letting these rules hit me without pausing and consciously choosing. This is where the intention comes in, right? To also ask, what does that freedom look like for me? Because it's going to look different for people. Some people want to travel the world, and some people just want the freedom to sleep in. And those are all perfect definitions of it. But what does it look like for you? Another thing that just popped into my mind as you were talking about the house a bit more, right, is also like you're right. People look at the exterior of the house and they're not so concerned about the foundation until something goes wrong. Like until there's an earthquake, you don't think about the foundation, right? But the other thing about that is people looking at the house and it's looking pretty and all the things. But people don't ask, is this a happy home? What's going on behind those walls, right? Like what is life like within that house? That's not really what people ask when they hear, oh yeah, a person makes X amount of money or they have this title or whatever, their business was featured somewhere, et cetera. It's like, well, great. Is it a happy home? And so what's it worth if your house is looking great, but the inside is miserable?
I want this to sit with people for a moment because
We'll just take a pause.
yeah, we took a pause, internalize that. It's very true because and I don't want to equate the success with unhappiness because we know that's not the case, right? Like many times people can have both, but it does seem that you don't question what is that business model? It might be producing a lot, but is that person actually content with it? Does it mean they actually get the freedom they wanted? Does it mean they have the impact that they dreamed of? Or is it just a case of it's just that assembly line in a different factory, right? Like just doing it a different way. And this brings back to the big question to ask you about how this is what kind of drives us to think for the happiness. How do we create a business that we actually want to do? Because I talked to you a little bit before about this fear of, well, I can't start what I want to because it won't work, or because people will judge me, or because I don't know where to begin. How do you start to reconcile what you want to do, what you think you would enjoy, with what the market is telling you, but not letting that take over?
Where are you taking this evidence from the market from? Because most people make an assumption. So the way that you just described it, I was like, oh, I want to do this, but I can't do it because usually that's not actually based on solid evidence or solid market research is based on assumptions. And there's a huge, huge difference in that, right? The other thing though is that when you're thinking about what you want to do, for most people, actually, there's not just one way of doing these things, right? So when we don't look at purpose as I need to do exactly this thing in exactly this way. I have like the one answer, which, there are some people who grow up and all they ever want to do is play the piano or whatever. But that's a very, 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 very small fraction of all of us. And the rest of us actually have this, I want to say, benefit of being a bit more varied in what interests us, what we value, where our strengths lie, etc. It might mean that I'm putting these puzzle pieces together in a different way. Because you can connect to anyone, it's so much more likely that you will find the people who actually want the thing that you are doing or who align with it because you lean deeply into what makes you special about it, which is probably another component I'm going to point out there is that often when we say, well, It's not gonna work, the market is saturated or, there's already too many people doing it, et cetera. What we're taking out of it is our special sauce. We don't need more water bottles or more brands of anything right of water, and still someone will come up with an idea of like, "Oh, we'll put it with this pretty mountain, and we'll say it came straight from there," and then people are gonna go like, "Oh my gosh, I need that because it's the fountain of youth." I'm in Switzerland right now, and Evian is like I just, like, see their posters everywhere. You can tell how I'm, like, literally just exposed to this kind of marketing at the moment. But it's like, we don't need that. The market isn't asking for it, and still you're like, "Well, if that's what that water can give me, then I want that." But if I take that specialness out of it, like, obviously, I've now compared people to a water bottle, but if I take my specialness out of it, right, and my maybe approach to things, but also my personality and the things that I enjoy, etcetera, then, yeah, I'm gonna just look like any average sort of standard supermarket water bottle.
There's so many cases with commodities like water that are so widespread, and you think, "Well, why would I pay a premium for this one?" Or, "Why would I specifically ask for that brand?" But at the same time, you could go to the supermarket, have unlabeled water, and you just pick whatever and you don't care. But it's the case of what is the unique aspect, imagery, branding, etcetera, that you're bringing into it. I love that because it opens up, and yeah, you're right. If you especially if you're operating online, there's probably someone who's gonna buy whatever unique, crazy dream you have.
Yeah, no, I genuinely believe that, and I'm gonna go to go back to the water. It's like what you were saying, right? Like, who would buy that when they can just buy like, who would pay premium for that? And it's like, the fact that people are, that's gonna depend on their values and what they most value. So if they think, the most pure filtered mountain water is going to lead to my long-term health, and that is my most important thing in my life, they might be like, "Yeah, I'm happy to pay a bit more for that and then save some money on something else," or whatever, not get my Starbucks order or whatever it is, right? You're predicting so much by saying like, "Oh, there's already this need is met already," and it's like, "Well, but has it been met in your unique way?"
Not figuring out what you're going to do is another form of procrastinating and avoidance that we were talking about. It allows you to keep going instead of focusing, and maybe it fails the first iteration, probably. And usually, the first time things are rough models. But if you choose and you accept that if I can learn to focus on my messaging, if I can learn to focus on my mindset, then potentially anything I can create, I can find a home for.
I've seen it happen all the time that the thing that you create doesn't actually change, but maybe the way you speak about it changes. If something is not selling, if you're making a mistake or whatever, that doesn't always mean we go back to, "Oh my gosh, well, in that case, my service, my product, I am bad, unworthy, etcetera." That's not usually what it's like. It just might mean, "Okay, there's a different way to market this that's gonna hit much more." I don't know about Evian's past marketing campaigns, but maybe they marketed it a completely different way in the past, and it's only once they hit the, "Oh, spring water mountain," like, image of, like, eternal youth, they very much seem to be marketing to, like, "You will stay young forever if you drink this." And maybe they didn't always land on that. Maybe then sales dropped and they had to reinvent, which again, we go back to the evolution. That's probably going to happen. You're going to be evolving, and to not take mistakes or failures or something not working the way you want it to work as an indication that you know, you're in the wrong place necessarily, but as information. Your brain literally learns by mistakes. Like the child learns to walk by falling down. And so all of this is just information. Create an MVP, create a minimum viable solution, and then just keep learning, keep evolving, keep iterating, and understand that that is how it's supposed to be.
And I'm sure people listening will have gotten so many aha moments and just shifts. I know that I have from this. Where can people find you to learn more? And also, how are the ways that you work with them?
Always best on Instagram at the Mind Friend. I'm also on LinkedIn if people are hanging out there. So I work one on one with people for at least 3 months. But I am also excitingly going to be releasing a group program quite soon, and sort of how to navigate the mental game of that in terms of showing up confidently, getting visible, and really being able to enjoy the life that you're creating. Feel free to head over to Instagram, shoot me a DM, and I'll kind of put you on the wait list.
If you're at least on the wait list, you know when it's coming out, you know the details. I'll include links for everything. And thank you so much for sharing this. I feel so motivated. It's early here for everyone listening, but I'm ready to
You're like, let's seize the day.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here and sharing so much of your knowledge.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a enjoyable conversation, and thank you for going along with all my metaphors and images, and so I appreciate that.